Hello, my name is Adam Martin, and today we're going to talk about the new Holler V2 release. So if you're new, what is Holler? So Holler is effectively a CLI tool that we use to collect OCR artifacts. So whether it be container images, Helm charts, files, ISOs, text files, whatever, and store them into a localized OCI layout. That's really all a Holler store is a glorified OCI layout. What does that mean? So then from there, I'm able to kind of save that layout as an archive, basically, that someone can pick up, move into their air gap, however it is that they do so. And then from there, they have the options of, copying those artifacts to a remote registry if one's available. And if you have a bunch of files, you can take those and copy them to a local directory if you need. Holler also has the ability to run its own embedded registry, so it can serve up a registry that things can consume from. In a similar vein, it has a file server that it can run. So again, if you've got a bunch of files in your store, you can serve them up in a file store for things to grab from. So we're kind of deeming this release the big overhaul, and yes, puns intended. So we've done a lot kind of to the foundation of Holler for this particular release that kind of removes a bit of our maintenance burden that we had with Holler that kind of really slowed us down with new features and just usability of particular features of Holler in the past that we really struggled with. So what are some examples of that? Some is that we actually were able to remove some middlemen like Oris. We used v1 of Oris, and that kind of sparked the conversation to begin with, in that was outdated. We really needed to move to v2 if we were going to stick to Oris. But in the act of doing so, we realized that, why do we need Oris in the first place? Why not cut out the middleman and go straight to things like Go Container Registry or Containerd's Docker Resolver and things of that nature? Just go straight to those APIs that are already proven and pretty easy to work with without having Oris set in front of it. We also had a cosign fork. We use cosign heavily in v1 for consuming OCI artifacts because we also wanted, when we pulled an OCI artifact, we wanted to be able to handle digital signatures coming with it as well, attestations. So if you had your SBOMs and things of that nature, we wanted to also pull that in along with that container image and whatnot. So along the same lines of our thinking with Oris, it's like, well, we could just do that ourselves. It's not that bad. And doing so, we eliminate the burden of having to maintain a cosign fork, which, they didn't always go in the same direction as we wanted to in terms of consuming artifacts. And as an added benefit, we were actually able to add in functionality for OCI referrers, which is kind of big because even cosign was moving away from the tagged dot sig and the dot attestation that came along with an image that, that's just kind of how it was stored in their registry. Versus now, things seem to be going in the manner of the OCI referrer. So why does this big overhaul matter to you guys, the users? Well, I think my favorite example, and the first one on this list, is the retries and ignore errors. And what do I mean by that? I mean, v1 Holler, let's say you're doing a copy of your local store to a remote registry, and you've got, I don't know, 500 artifacts in your store that it needs to copy. Let's say the particular environment you're in had crappy connectivity. Your connectivity wasn't solid, and sometimes things happen. If you were in the middle of your Holler copy when that particular hiccup happened, you're toast. You've got to start all over, and you could have potentially wasted hours at that point because we didn't have that fine-grained control of image by image. We were handing the entire OCI layout over to a middleman effectively. But now that we're not doing that, we can do things like retry. So if you're 100 items into your 500 item store and there's a connectivity issue, it has the ability to retry. I believe the default is about 3 retries, but you can use the retries flag on the Holler Store copy to set it to a higher number. Let's say you're working uh, in a really poor environment with bad connectivity, and you need to retry for days. You can set that number higher than 3 if you need to. Plus, there's the ignore errors flag that you have now, and it's pretty much like it sounds. Like if you come across a particular error, it's logged. You can see what that particular error is and for which artifact that error belongs to. What if I just want to skip it and keep going? I can now do that because, again, we've got that fine-grained control. I think that's big. I think it's big, and it could be a big time saver because you're not always guaranteed perfect connectivity when you're in some of these environments. And having some help there, having Holler be a bit more lenient when things aren't perfect, I think is a solid enhancement to have be there for Holler. And then, of course, as I mentioned, just no more fork maintenance, no more having to worry about are they going to add new patches for ORIS v1 and to help eliminate some CVEs. We're in control now. We're able to move faster, and our code base is definitely cleaner as a result. So now let's talk about some of the new features. First one up is chunked hauls. So let's say you have a giant store, and the resulting archive of your Holler store save is, multiple gigabytes, and maybe perhaps the area that you need to load that tarball into might not be so friendly to a multi-gigabyte tarball effectively. So one of the things we introduced here is the ability to kind of chunk those into smaller sizes, if you will. You can see from the example that we want to make 500 megabyte chunks instead. And so it's going to create multiple archives that make up the entirety of your store, but into smaller chunks that when on the other end, once you get those loaded into that environment, Holler will be able to understand those chunks and put them back together into a single store. So hoping that, if you need that as an option, it can better help you get some of those larger things into, perhaps your air-gapped environment. Ooh, this is one I'm really excited about. So Holler now has the ability to pull an artifact straight from your local Docker daemon. Let's say you're working on a development project and you really don't have a need to push something that you're working on to a local registry first to then pull into Holler. You can just pull it straight out of your local Docker daemon, straight from the CLI now. So when you pull in an artifact to the Holler store, if that particular artifact has things like digital signatures, attestations, whatever, like we talked about before, those come with it. But sometimes you're really trying to minimize the size of this Holler store, and you don't necessarily care about those additional artifacts that come along with your container image, for example. We now have a way to exclude the extra stuff. So if you don't want those digital signatures to come across with your image when you pull it into the Holler store, there's a flag for that. Same for the attestations, etc. And this last one here I'm really excited about, and that's the dry run flag. So when you use Holler Store Sync along with the products flag, you really don't have an easy way to tell what is going to be synced into Holler until after it's pretty much done its thing. So many people want to know, like, ahead of time, what all am I getting ready to pull in, because it might be massive. They might not have enough storage planned ahead of time for such a massive list, or something along those lines. Dry run now gives me the capability to see kind of what will be synced when you run that command, and that insight and the ability to modify that list is going to be invaluable. It'll save people a lot of time so they can plan accordingly, with what that sync dash dash products will be pulling into their store. All right, and this last one here, it not necessarily is new to V2, but our rewrite feature hits GA with the 2.0 release. And the rewrite feature is super nice because let's say you've pulled in a bunch of artifacts that may have a different path than what your upstream registry that you need to push to ultimately has. So wouldn't it be nice if I could just make that path the same as my destination path at the time that I'm consuming these artifacts into Holler? So the rewrite feature actually lets you do that. So when you pull in, I mean, you can see the examples here. When you pull in that artifact, you can use rewrite to say, give me a different path for that particular artifact, so that when you do the copy, it just goes where you expect it to on the destination route. All right, last up for V2 is breaking changes. The first one here really shouldn't be a surprise. The v1 alpha 1 API within your Holler manifest has been deprecated for several minor versions of v1. So we're finally just cutting the cord there and getting rid of that. So you really want to make sure that if you have any stored Holler manifests lying around with that particular API at the top, you're going to want to change that over to just v1, because anything still listed as v1 alpha 1 is just going to get totally ignored and skipped with a warning by Holler v2. The second one on the list is just kind of more referring to the fact that we did remove our cosine fork. And while we did replace all of the functionality that we were getting from that fork with our own new internals, it still would be a pretty smart idea to make sure any of your existing workflows still function as you would expect. We did a ton of testing here. Everything seems to be perfectly fine, but we never know. If you end up having any issues, please drop us an issue within our Holler repo in GitHub. And then just to cover all the bases, if you're wondering how do you actually get Holler, here you go. You can either do a curl just to pull in the binary. If you're on Mac OS, we actually have a homebrew tab that you can pull from. Or on GitHub, all of our releases within the release section have all of our build artifacts for Holler, and you can grab the binary that's appropriate for your environment from there, and you should be good to go. And that's it. We are super excited about V2 of Holler, and we hope you guys are too. Please go visit our repo. We have the V2 release there with all of the release notes in the release section, and of course there's always our Holler documentation site that you can see here on the slide. And that's it. Take care.